The most dangerous people are rarely loud, violent, or obvious. They are the ones who quietly do certain things no one is watching for. They don't argue or posture. They don't try to dominate the room. They listen. They let others speak freely and reveal plans, frustrations, ambitions, and weaknesses without reacting. Because nothing about them feels threatening, they are trusted. Because they don't rush to define themselves, they remain unreadable. And because they seem insignificant, they are given access most people never earn. This is where most people misunderstand danger. We are trained to fear aggression, dominance, and visible ambition. But the people Machiavelli warned about operate through restraint. They gain leverage by staying quiet and influence outcomes without ever appearing involved. In this video, you'll see the 5 behaviors that make these people dangerous, especially the last one, because it's the reason most people only realize who they were dealing with after the damage is done. By the end of this video, you'll see these behaviors clearly, and you won't be able to unsee them. The first thing dangerous people do is closely observe others, let them reveal themselves, and keep their own intentions completely hidden. This is the moment where the imbalance begins, though no one feels it yet. Observation creates asymmetry. One side is exposed, the other remains sealed. Every detail gathered becomes a quiet advantage. Who seeks approval, who fears conflict, who craves recognition, who resents authority, who feels overlooked. These details are rarely dramatic, but together they form a precise psychological map. And because the observer has offered nothing in return, there is nothing to map on them. They remain opaque. When asked about themselves, they answer vaguely, redirect gently, or respond just enough to appear polite. They never lie outright. They simply never disclose anything that could later be used to predict, pressure, or corner them. Over time, people begin to fill that void with assumptions, and assumptions are always more forgiving than truth. Silence also creates gravity. When someone speaks less, their words appear heavier. People lean in, they wait, they assign depth, where there may simply be discipline. This is how invisibility becomes leverage. Others begin to perform unconsciously, hoping to draw a reaction, a nod, a sign of approval. The silent observer becomes a reference point without ever asking to be one. Machiavelli warned that men who behave this way are often mistaken for passive participants, when in reality, they are the only ones fully present. They are not distracted by the need to impress. They are not diluted by self-expression. Every interaction becomes data. Every emotional display becomes a signal. And because nothing is demanded, everything is given. What makes this foundation so dangerous is that it feels fair. After all, no one is being forced to speak. No one is being interrogated. The danger lies in consent without awareness. People reveal themselves because it feels safe to do so. They believe they are in control of the exchange, unaware that the exchange is one-sided. The observer remembers everything. Patterns emerge quietly. Predictability takes shape. And once predictability exists, influence becomes inevitable. Not through threats or commands, but through timing, suggestion, and strategic absence. By the time others sense something is wrong, they cannot explain what shifted, only that the ground no longer feels level. This behavior goes unnoticed because it flatters human nature. People like to be heard. They like to feel understood. When someone offers attention without judgment, it feels rare and valuable. The observer becomes a confidant without promising loyalty, a witness without accountability. And because they have shared nothing, they cannot be questioned, challenged, or contradicted. They exist without a recorded position. No one can say where they stand, what they believe, or what they intend. That ambiguity is mistaken for neutrality. In reality, it is insulation. Machiavelli observed that the most secure positions are often held by those who are least defined, because definition invites opposition. Once this pattern is established, it does not remain static. Observation sharpens. Silence becomes selective. The dangerous individual begins to notice not just what people say, but when they say it, to whom, and under what emotional pressure. They see which truths only emerge late at night, which loyalties collapse under stress, which principles evaporate when comfort is threatened. None of this requires intervention. It only requires patience. And patience, when combined with memory, turns ordinary human behavior into something exploitable. The observer does not need to act yet. They are already positioned, already informed, already insulated. And as others continue to speak freely, unaware of the imbalance forming beneath their own words. The silence across from them grows heavier, more deliberate, and far more intentional than it appears. Because what has been gathered in quiet cannot be taken back, only used when the moment no longer requires permission. They do not change their posture when tension enters the room. Their breathing remains even. Their voice does not rise to meet yours, nor does it retreat. This steadiness is not kindness, and it is not maturity in the way people like to imagine it. It is calibration. While others react, these figures remain fixed, watching the temperature of the exchange climb without offering heat of their own. They allow frustration, excitement, jealousy, or fear to surface around them, not by force but by permission. A pause held a second too long, a neutral question placed at the wrong moment, a remark delivered without emphasis. Each small act is chosen because it feels inconsequential. Nothing appears aggressive, nothing appears intentional, and because the surface remains calm, the emotional disturbance is always attributed to the other person. What confuses most people is that emotional control is mistaken for virtue. We are taught that composure equals restraint, that calm equals safety. So when someone remains unmoved in volatile moments, they are praised for being grounded, rational, above the chaos. But this interpretation assumes passivity. It assumes that calmness is a reaction rather than a weapon. The dangerous individual understands something most never consider. Emotions are contagious, but control is not. When one side stays regulated and the other does not, the imbalance widens instantly. The unregulated party begins to explain themselves, defend themselves, justify their tone, their intent, their feelings. The calm observer does not need to accuse. The reaction accuses itself. The second thing dangerous people do is remain emotionally neutral, while quietly triggering emotions in everyone else. This law is not executed through insults or open pressure that would expose intent and invite resistance. Instead, it operates through ambiguity, a statement that could be read two ways, a question that sounds sincere but lands like a test, a silence that follows a confession, forcing the speaker to fill it. Each move is deniable. If challenged, the response is always reasonable, calm, innocent. This is why the target feels unsettled, but cannot articulate why. They sense they are losing ground emotionally, yet nothing concrete has occurred. Their reactions begin to feel excessive, even to themselves. Meanwhile, the one who initiated the shift remains untouched, observing how quickly equilibrium can be disrupted without ever raising their voice. Machiavelli warned that men who can govern their own emotions while stirring those of others hold a disproportionate advantage, because emotion narrows vision. When people are reactive, they become predictable. Anger seeks release. Anxiety seeks reassurance. Pride seeks recognition. By staying emotionally still, the dangerous individual allows these impulses to surface unfiltered. They see where pressure points exist, how easily they can be activated, and how long recovery takes. This is not empathy, it is reconnaissance. Every emotional spike reveals something about priorities and thresholds, and because the observer never joins the emotional exchange, they never leave fingerprints. Over time, this dynamic trains others into weakness without force. People begin to anticipate reactions that never come. They grow uneasy in the silence. They attempt to regain balance by offering explanations, concessions, humor, even apologies that were never requested. The calm figure does nothing to stop this. In fact, their restraint accelerates it. Emotional labor shifts entirely onto the other side. One person carries the weight of feeling while the other remains unburdened. This is exhausting, and exhaustion leads to mistakes. Words are chosen poorly, boundaries soften, confessions slip. All the while, the instigator appears reasonable, even sympathetic, because they never display the volatility they quietly summoned. This behavior remains invisible because it never violates social rules outright. No line is crossed loudly enough to be named. No accusation can stick. If the reactive person finally confronts the dynamic, they are often met with confusion or mild concern. The calm one appears composed, unthreatening, even wounded by the suggestion. The emotional person, now heightened, looks unstable by comparison. Their credibility erodes in real time. This reversal is the true danger. Not the provocation itself, but the way control frames perception. Machiavelli observed that perception, once tilted, rarely returns to neutral without cost. As this pattern deepens, reactions begin to occur faster. What once required subtle pressure now needs only presence. The emotional body remembers the imbalance. Tension rises before words are spoken. The dangerous individual does not need to provoke actively anymore. Their calm has become the provocation. Others begin to self-regulate around them, suppressing emotion, overthinking responses, rehearsing conversations that have not yet happened. Power has shifted without declaration. The exchange no longer operates on equal footing. One side feels, the other measures. One side reacts, the other records. And because no rule has been broken, no defense can be justified, even as the emotional terrain continues to tilt, slowly, quietly, toward a point where control no longer needs to be exercised at all. By this stage, the imbalance no longer feels emotional. It begins to feel structural. People around such a figure notice that things seem easier when they are nearby, and harder when they are absent. Decisions stall, momentum fades, confidence weakens. This is not because the dangerous individual is doing more, but because they have positioned themselves as a quiet, stabilizing force. They offer solutions sparingly, guidance selectively, assistance only when it reinforces their role. Others start to rely on that presence without consciously choosing to. What once felt like calm becomes reassurance. What once felt like restraint becomes competence. And slowly, the environment reshapes itself around a single axis, where comfort and progress appear to flow through one source. This is where most observers make their final mistake. They assume loyalty is forming. They believe gratitude is the glue. They mistake reliance for respect. But loyalty is chosen, dependency is engineered. The dangerous individual never asks for devotion, never demands allegiance, never binds anyone with promises. Instead, they remove alternatives. They make themselves the most reliable option by subtly undermining other supports, other confidences, other paths forward. Advice from elsewhere feels clumsy by comparison. Independent action begins to feel risky. Over time, people consult before they move, wait before they decide, hesitate without realizing why. Machiavelli observed that power solidifies fastest when others believe they are acting freely, unaware that their freedom has been quietly narrowed. The third thing dangerous people do is make others dependent on them rather than loyal. This law operates invisibly because dependency feels personal. It feels earned. The dependent person believes they arrived there on their own, through experience and preference. They do not see the small constraints that were introduced along the way. The delayed response that discouraged outside counsel. The subtle doubt planted about someone else's competence. The selective support that arrived only after hesitation was expressed. Each move appears helpful in isolation. Together, they form a closed loop. The dangerous individual becomes the reference point for validation, direction, and stability, while never acknowledging the bond aloud. There is no contract to break, no vow to betray, and because nothing explicit exists, the dependent person cannot articulate what has changed, only that separation now feels uncomfortable. What deepens the trap is that dependency masquerades as safety. People tell themselves they are simply being practical, that they trust proven judgment, that it makes sense to lean on someone consistent. But consistency can be manufactured by intervening just enough to prevent failure. The dangerous individual ensures that growth never occurs without them. Others begin to doubt their own capacity to act alone. Confidence erodes, not through humiliation, but through repeated rescue. Each intervention reinforces the same lesson. Without this presence, outcomes worsen. With it, things stabilize. Machiavelli warned that men who allow others to grow dependent rarely need to command obedience, because obedience becomes the path of least resistance. The most effective dependency is emotional neutrality, paired with functional indispensability. The dangerous individual does not shower praise or affection. They remain composed, measured, slightly distant. This distance creates tension, and tension creates effort. Others work harder to maintain access, to stay useful, to remain aligned. They overperform without being asked. They adjust behavior preemptively. All the while, the architect of the dependency remains unburdened. If challenged, they can withdraw support calmly, framing it as circumstance rather than punishment. The dependent party feels the loss immediately. Anxiety surfaces, urgency returns. The imbalance becomes undeniable, yet still difficult to name. Once dependency is established, it reshapes perception. The dependent person begins to defend the source of their reliance, even against evidence. Criticism feels threatening. Alternatives feel unsafe. Loyalty would require belief. Dependency requires fear of loss. This is why the dangerous individual never declares authority. They do not need recognition. Their power exists in absence as much as presence. When they step back, the system falters. When they return, balance is restored. And as this pattern repeats, the realization slowly forms in the minds of those caught within it. What feels like trust is actually necessity. What feels like choice is actually constraint. And what feels like stability may not survive the moment that support is withheld. Which is precisely why the silence around that possibility grows heavier, and the cost of independence begins to feel higher than anyone expected. At this point, the structure around them feels solid enough that movement no longer draws attention. The dangerous individual no longer needs to test reactions or reinforce reliance overtly. The environment has adapted. Expectations are set. Roles feel natural. This is where intent disappears entirely from view. Not because it has vanished, but because it has been layered beneath usefulness, beneath calm, beneath a reputation for reasonableness. People believe they know who this person is, because familiarity has replaced scrutiny. They confuse consistency of behavior with transparency of motive. And in doing so, they stop asking the only question that ever mattered. What is this all moving toward? Concealment at this level is not secrecy in the dramatic sense. There are no hidden meetings, no whispered plots, no obvious deceptions. True concealment is far more ordinary. It is the habit of acting without explaining why, of participating without declaring stakes, of supporting outcomes without attaching identity to them. The dangerous individual allows others to argue about meaning, while they remain aligned only to direction. Their words are neutral enough to be interpreted favorably by any side. Their actions appear cooperative, never absolute. If confronted, they can always say they meant well, that they were misunderstood, that circumstances changed. Nothing they have done contradicts that claim, because nothing they have done has been explicitly defined. The fourth thing dangerous people do is hide their intentions until it's too late to push back. This law functions because intention is what people organize against. When intent is visible, opposition forms naturally. Allies choose sides. Lines are drawn. But when intent is absent or appears fragmented, no such alignment occurs. Everyone assumes they are dealing with a partial picture, never realizing there is a complete one held elsewhere. The dangerous individual benefits from this fragmentation. Each person sees only what is relevant to them. No one compares notes, because there seems to be nothing to compare. Machiavelli observed that men who reveal their ends too early invite interference, while those who move without declaring purpose arrive before anyone realizes a destination existed. What makes this concealment so effective is that it feels ethical. There is no overt manipulation, no false promises. The dangerous individual does not need to lie about what they want if they never state what they want at all. They allow others to project alignment, assuming shared values, shared goals, shared direction. Each projection is welcomed, never corrected. This creates the illusion of unity without commitment. If outcomes later conflict, responsibility can be redistributed, misunderstandings can be blamed, relationships can be reframed. The architect remains untouched because no explicit claim was ever made. Over time, concealment reshapes memory. People remember cooperation, not calculation. They recall assistance, not positioning. When questioned, they struggle to pinpoint when influence began, because it never announced itself. The dangerous individual has always appeared reasonable, measured, even generous. Their intent, having never been declared, cannot be accused. This is why exposure becomes impossible once the structure is mature. There is no document to reveal, no statement to quote, no promise to break. Only outcomes exist. And outcomes, once normalized, rarely provoke revolt. Machiavelli warned that by the time men recognize they have been led somewhere they did not choose, the cost of reversal outweighs the cost of submission. Concealment also allows for adaptability. Because no intent is publicly fixed, it can shift without consequence. The dangerous individual can adjust direction in response to resistance without appearing inconsistent. They are never wrong because they were never specific. Others, bound by their stated positions, bear the weight of contradiction. This flexibility compounds power quietly. While everyone else defends past declarations, the concealed actor moves freely, unburdened by the need to explain evolution. Change appears natural when no destination was ever announced. What finally locks this behavior into place is trust born of absence. People trust what has never threatened them. They trust what has never demanded belief. They trust what has never asked to be followed. The dangerous individual becomes background infrastructure, essential, unnoticed, unquestioned, and when outcomes finally converge in a way that benefits them disproportionately, the response is not outrage but confusion. How did this happen? When did this begin? Who allowed it? The answer is always the same. It unfolded without friction, because intent was hidden beneath cooperation, beneath calm, beneath a pattern so normalized that challenging it now would require dismantling the very stability everyone has come to depend on, which is why the silence around motive grows thicker, the questions grow quieter, and the space to resist continues to narrow just as the final shape of control starts to become impossible to ignore. By the time this final pattern reveals itself, the figure no longer needs concealment, provocation, or dependence to function. The structure stands on its own. What remains is the most unsettling quality of all: action that does not seek reflection, permission, or reassurance. Others still look outward before they move, measuring approval, waiting for consensus, gauging reaction. This individual does not. Their decisions emerge already complete. They do not announce them. They do not defend them. They do not soften them to be accepted. The absence of validation seeking is mistaken for confidence, then maturity, then inevitability. People assume that someone who does not ask must already be justified. They rarely consider that justification may be irrelevant to them entirely. This behavior unnerves because it breaks a silent social contract. Most people are bound together by feedback loops. They speak to be heard, act to be acknowledged, adjust to remain accepted. Even authority often performs humility to maintain legitimacy. But the dangerous individual has detached from that economy. They do not negotiate their identity through reaction. They do not correct themselves based on applause or outrage. Their stillness after acting creates a vacuum where others rush to supply meaning. Observers argue among themselves about intent, morality, or consequence, while the actor remains unmoved. Machiavelli observed that men who free themselves from the need to be approved are feared not because they are cruel, but because they are uncontainable. The fifth thing dangerous people do is operate without needing validation or approval from anyone. This law is the final separation between influence and control. When someone no longer requires confirmation, they cannot be steered through praise or restrained through disapproval. Approval loses leverage. Criticism loses force. Social pressure collapses. This is why such individuals are often described as cold or distant, when in reality they are simply unresponsive to the currencies that bind others. They do not posture for alignment. They do not explain themselves to remain liked. If questioned, they may answer briefly or not at all. The refusal to engage is not defensive, it is structural. Their internal criteria have replaced the external crowd entirely. What makes this quality so destabilizing is that it renders opposition ineffective. To oppose someone, you must be able to influence their behavior through consequence. But consequence requires investment in perception. The dangerous individual has already exited that exchange. They are not insulated by arrogance or denial, but by indifference to judgment. This indifference is often misread as strength of character. In truth, it is freedom from constraint. When nothing needs to be proven, nothing can be taken away. Machiavelli warned that those who act without seeking approval often appear unstoppable, because there is no visible handle by which to restrain them. At this stage, others begin to orbit, not out of admiration but confusion. They wait for explanation that never comes. They attempt to infer values from outcomes. They debate whether the silence indicates wisdom or threat. The dangerous individual allows this speculation to continue because it costs nothing. Every interpretation distracts from the fact that action is already underway. The absence of validation seeking creates an illusion of inevitability, as if events are unfolding according to some larger logic no one else has access to. People comply not because they agree, but because resistance feels unanchored. This is where all previous behaviors converge. Observation provided information without exposure. Emotional control destabilized others without confrontation. Dependency narrowed options without command. Concealed intention prevented early resistance. Now, action proceeds without approval because approval is no longer required. The system has been conditioned to adapt rather than oppose. Those within it rationalize outcomes after the fact. convincing themselves that what happened was reasonable, necessary, or unavoidable. Machiavelli observed that power reaches its most refined state when it no longer needs to announce itself, justify itself, or ask to be followed. What remains is not spectacle, but quiet permanence. The dangerous individual does not celebrate outcomes. They do not seek recognition for results. They move on, already oriented toward the next adjustment. Others are left processing, debating, reacting. The imbalance is complete. Not because force was applied, but because every layer of resistance was rendered irrelevant. In this state, danger no longer looks like threat. It looks like order. It looks like calm. It looks like someone who never needed your agreement to act, never needed your permission to decide, and never needed your approval to reshape the terrain you now stand on. If you've made it this far, it's because a part of you already knows this truth. The most dangerous people are never loud, never chaotic, never obvious. They don't threaten, they don't explain, they don't react. They move quietly, observe patiently, and strike only when resistance is already gone. Now tell me in the comments, did you recognize yourself in any of these signs? Or worse, did you recognize someone close to you? If this message touched you, if it made sense, write in the comments, "I see the danger." Let's see how many here are truly ready to protect themselves or become the one others never see coming. And don't forget, keep watching the next video. It's important, much more than you imagine. See you there.